Welcome, and it's always my pleasure each year to introduce to you the Crysostom winner for the oratory contest that we do here at ACCS. And every year, the bar gets a little higher. Now, I don't want to discourage any of your students from attempting it, but I do realize that many of our speakers get a little bit intimidated after they hear how well spoken our students are. So we're looking forward to having Ben Carson soon, but first we're going to have Jillian Barr, who's the winner. Can I have those who are here from Wilson Hill and Jillian's parents stand up really quick? Because as I understand it, there's a little bit of a, oh, here we go, they're the ones in the front row. Excellent, thank you. Well, I can also say that the poise of Jillian has already impressed me. Her speech will be on classical music and beauty. So with that, Jillian, if you'd come out. Welcome.
Good morning. Before I give my speech, I would like to thank ACCS for this incredible honor and privilege. I would also like to thank Mr. and Mrs. Donaldson, founders of Wilson Hill Academy, for their innovation and vision to bring classical Christian education to homes and towns like my hometown, where the closest classical Christian brick and mortar school is 100 miles away. And finally, I would like to dedicate this speech to both my rhetoric teacher and friend, Dr. Tom Vieira, and this world's finest and dearest English teacher, Mrs. Laura Ruby. And with that, it is my great joy that I get to share with you my thesis, titled Transcendent Beauty, Beholding God in Classical Music. And to begin, I actually need your help. I'm going to ask you 2 yes or no questions. If the answer is yes, please raise your hand. If it's no, please keep your hand lowered. The first question is this: do you think that you could fairly confidently name 20 modern music artists ranging from now to the last 60 years? Okay, so majority of us feel pretty good about that. Second question: do you think that you could fairly confidently name 20 classical music composers? Okay, so there are some of you out there, but we can see that the results are pretty different here. But let me let you in on a little secret. I knew that the majority of you would answer yes to my first question, while the majority of you would answer no to my second. Because here's the reality. I've given this speech several different times, and the answers are always the same. The majority of us say yes, we can name modern music artists, but no, I'm really not so sure about classical. It all continues to confirm my fear and the need for this thesis. Here's the problem. We don't know classical music, and we have little to no familiarity with the master composers. The proliferation of modern music has caused us to become so involved with the music written today that we have denied ourselves not only some of the most beautiful music ever written, but an opportunity to behold God. But before taking this further, let me clarify that I didn't fly across this nation to tell you that we shouldn't listen to modern music. Rather, I came here today to share with you why we should listen to classical music. Classical music has a wonder and a beauty that modern music simply does not. A wonder and a beauty that we should not ignore or deny ourselves. So please listen as I argue that people of all ages must listen to classical music because of its transcendent quality, shown through complex form, and because of its sublime beauty. But first, I need to establish both a historical and a definitional context surrounding classical and modern music. Classical music is the music written during the Common Practice period, or the 3 centuries roughly between 1600 and the early 1900s. For the purpose of my speech, the music written during this time is classical because it has 2 main characteristics. First, its forms. Now, classical music could be extended into the 1500s, where we see the beautiful choral music. However, I say 1600s because it wasn't until the 1600s when acoustic instruments really began to develop. And this is what ultimately brought in music as an art. With the invention of these instruments, musicians and composers suddenly had the means to create complex melodies and harmonies, which ultimately allowed forms in music to begin to develop. Classical music is filled with forms, a couple examples being fugues, sonatas, capriccios, inventions, and symphonies, a couple of which I will return to soon in this speech. But each of these named styles have standards within their compositional form. For example, a sonata pertains to a strict ABA form, while a capriccio will always demonstrate chromatics at its core. Form is a key characteristic in classical music. The second characteristic is this: the intentionality behind classical music's composition. The classical composers composed their music for beauty, knowing that it reached to something greater. Beethoven believed that, quote, "Music is the mediator between the spiritual and the sensual life. It is the one incorporeal entrance into the higher world of knowledge, which comprehends mankind, but which mankind cannot comprehend," end quote. While Gustav Holst, another master composer, explains, quote, "Music, being identical with heaven, isn't a thing of momentary thrills or even hourly ones. It's a condition of eternity," end quote. Classical music was written with a known spiritual and beautiful quality. Entering the 20th century, however, music changed as its purpose shifted to that of industry and production. This is ultimately because modern sound and mixing allowed for musical creation apart from acoustic instruments, and as a result, music became very easy to compose. In fact, a recent study shows that 1,000 new songs are uploaded to digital music sources every hour. Instead of focusing on composition, modern music often focuses on what appeals to the populace, and because of this, industry propels modern music production, and beauty is defined by what will sell. Again, I'm not here to condemn modern music. I'm here to demonstrate that there are important differences between classical and modern music, and that we should explore classical music further. But before I can do so, I need to define beauty and the divine. Now, I know what is beauty is a question that philosophers, theologians, and likely many of you here today have discussed for a long time. It's a question with much depth and much complexity, but as I do not have time to address the depth of that question in my thesis, I will apply a working definition of beauty. Specifically, I will refer to beauty in light of Thomas Aquinas' definition, which he develops in his Summa Theologica. Beauty is anything which has wholeness, harmony, and radiance. Something beautiful will objectively contain all three elements. Finally, when referring to the divine, I will refer specifically to the triune God of the Bible. In this speech, I will argue that classical music has a transcendent quality and will explain how classical music's form establishes its beauty. I will not focus on broad societal, cultural, or educational efforts to bring classical music to prominence, but will instead demonstrate why people should learn to love and appreciate classical music and incorporate it in their daily lives. So let's dive in. Classical music has a transcendent quality. According to God's design, music and beauty have an inseparable relationship, and together, they should reflect the divine. But before we can understand how this applies to classical music, we have to understand the relationship. Looking to his word, we know that our God sings. Zephaniah tells Jerusalem that God, quote, "will exalt over you with loud singing," end quote. The Bible also frequently refers to the voice of God, which theologians and authors such as Dr. Peter Leithart and C.S. Lewis have interpreted as God being a singer. Because God sings, and God is the creator of all things, he's the creator of music. In addition to being the creator of music, God is beautiful. David writes in the Psalms that he desires to, quote, "gaze upon the beauty of the Lord and to inquire in his temple," end quote. Not only is the Lord God himself beautiful, but he has made everything beautiful in its time, according to Solomon. All beauty reflects God's beauty, so beautiful music reflects God. Following this argument, there is a relationship between music and beauty. When music is created beautifully, it is transcendent. it reflects the divine. In developing classical music's definition, I explained that the classical composers intentionally composed their music for beauty, knowing that it reached to something greater. The beauty in classical music reaches beyond this material world to the divine, and this is classical music's transcendent quality. But up to this point, I've spoken fairly generally about classical music's beauty. So now I want to argue that classical music's beauty comes from complex form. Now, to refresh ourselves, Aquinas says beauty is anything which has wholeness, harmony, and radiance. To achieve this completeness, we need form. The essentiality of form comes from Genesis 1 and 2, when God created the world. He brought order from chaos and demonstrated beauty by bringing the elements of creation together in a specific way. He spoke, and the formless took form, and he called it good. Here, God established that form creates beauty. A human made in God's image can also bring order from disorder through form. This is important because classical music emphasizes form and craftsmanship. The classical composers brought together notes, meter, tempo, dynamics, and technique in form. By themselves, these elements of music are nothing. And if you put them together randomly and without form, they can be very ugly. But if you put them together well and skillfully in form, they are beautiful. Johannes Brahms writes, quote, "Without craftsmanship, inspiration is a mere reed shaken in the wind," end quote. Composing beautiful music takes skill and creativity. It takes craftsmanship, and it's not simple. But what God did in Genesis was not simple. In fact, God's creation reflects the most intricate complexities we know, complexities we will never fully understand. Classical music demonstrates similar complexities because its form reflects God's form in Genesis, and its beauty, God's beauty. But now, let me show you. I want to look at two classical music forms in hopes to demonstrate how form leads to beauty in music. Though I will say that this will not do much justice, as there are so many classical music forms which I would love to explore with you at some point, but this will at least give you a snapshot since I don't have time to explain them all. First, a fugue. A fugue is a polyphonic piece of music. Polyphonic means that the piece has multiple different voices, and typically 3. A fugue always has a main theme, which becomes the familiar melody of the piece. Working together, the voices develop this theme throughout the piece by building upon one another. Again, a fugue is multi-voiced and thematic. Second, the sonata. A sonata is a piece which has one voice, but employs complex variations of that voice throughout the entire piece. 3 sections comprise the sonata: the exposition, the development, and the recapitulation. This is known as ABA form, where the exposition introduces the theme, the development develops the theme, and the recapitulation plays the theme the same as the exposition, but in a different key. So again, we have theme, development of theme, return to theme, A, B, A. Turning to Aquinas, I want to show you that both of these pieces demonstrate beauty and completeness. A fugue is whole through the voices. The 3 individual voices come together to create one voice. Similarly, the sonata's 3 distinct parts come together to create one piece, a whole. A fugue is harmonious, by definition of harmony, through the 3 voices working with one another. A sonata is harmonious, again, through the 3 parts working together. And both the fugue and the sonata create a sense of radiance through their wholeness and harmony. What I mean is this: the wholeness and harmony of the piece are what make the notes play together so well. And because the notes work together so well, because they are intricately woven together, they are radiant. In other words, the notes become glorious. They reflect the beauty and the glory of our whole and our harmonious God. Again, these 2 examples are but a fraction of what I would love to share with you today, but I hope they give you an idea of the complexities and the completenesses found in these forms. But why does any of this matter? Beauty, radiance, sonata form, complexity, divine music. It all leads me to my last point, quick, though very important. In fact, the rest of my speech has little importance without this point. Classical music can lead us into the worship of our God and allow us to stand in awe of his beauty. We consume music every single day, whether that be listening to it, playing it, singing it, perhaps even dancing to it at points. But the modern world has taught us that this is all for consumption, for how it makes me feel, for my own entertainment. I love how the music scholar Robert Mendel puts it, saying, quote, "The objection to the theory that music is and should be only entertainment is that it relegates the art to a place of relative unimportance. The music that we value most is not a mere embellishment of life, but a spiritual enrichment of it," end quote. If we only consume music to please and entertain ourselves, then we have missed God's higher purpose for music, to spiritually enrich us, the listeners, and glorify him through its beauty. Today, we do not think about the depth that music has, and we have lost sight of its value and what it can do in the human life. Classical music can help us redeem how we think about music because its focus on beauty gives us the means and perhaps even the desire to worship and glorify God. However, one might object, saying that all music has a beautiful and spiritual quality. After all, didn't I establish that God sings and created all music? Did I not also say that God is beautiful and makes everything beautiful? This would imply that all music, regardless of form or genre, has a beautiful and spiritual essence. It seems incorrect according to Scripture, then, to elevate one form of music above another. And these points hold merit. God did create all music, so I'm not saying that you can't find beauty in modern music. However, varying forms result in varying degrees of beauty. Generally speaking, modern music's compositional form is simplistic, whereas, as I've established, classical music is complex. In complexity, we find greater wholeness, harmony, radiance, and thereby greater beauty. And this is true for other artistic disciplines. For example, think of a tract home in a suburb. This home shows beauty because it is quaint, functional, it's nicely decorated, and it's familiar. However, it is beautiful to a lesser degree when compared to a medieval church with stained glass windows, soaring spires, and flying buttresses. In the same way, classical music reflects a degree of beauty that differs from modern music not because they differ in spiritual or beautiful essence, but because classical music's form creates a beauty which reflects God's beauty to a greater degree. Though some also argue that the form in music does not establish its degree of beauty, because that is the job of the ear of the listener. In his Of the Standard of Taste, David Hume explains, quote, "Without beauty is no quality in things themselves. It exists merely in the mind which contemplates them, and each mind perceives a different beauty," end quote. From this perspective, beauty concerns itself with personal taste. We do not define beauty by objective terms because every person has differing standards and appetites for beauty in music. However, this presents a subjective beauty, which is inconsistent with a biblical perspective. We do not decide what is beautiful because God established a standard of beauty in Genesis, which brings us back to form. God used form to create beauty, and in doing so, he showed us what is beautiful according to him. Because of this, we cannot subjectively decide what is beautiful for ourselves because God created objective beauty. In wrapping up, I want you to think about this. We have composed much music throughout history, but most music has passed away within a generation and is no longer part of our remembrance, like chaff on the winnowing floor or metal impurities in the fire. That which is of inferior quality will perish. But classical music is the choice grain or finest gold because it's still with us. It's still beautiful. And most importantly, it still reflects our holy God. But we have to hear it. We have to choose to listen to it. We have to be the ones who decide to fill our lives with what is good, true, and very beautiful. Isn't that what this conference is about anyways? Coming together so that as teachers, as faculty, advisors, and as administrators, you can know how to most effectively teach students to not only see what is good, true, and beautiful, but to love what is good, true, and beautiful, so that as students and as people growing in this world, we may know and have a way to fully glorify God every day. So I ask you, choose a composer. There are so many: Bach, Beethoven, Chopin, Debussy, Scarlatti, and listen to his works. Listen daily if you can, and strain your ears to hear what's happening in the piece. Ask which pieces are more favorable and why. Choose another composer and do the same process, but this time compare this composer to the first, discussing the similarities and the differences between them. Now, this process will seem difficult at first because our ears have become lazy, but it's necessary. I've told you why we must listen to classical music, and I can do no more. In fact, I've tried to do the impossible. I mean, how does someone truly demonstrate classical music's form, beauty, complexity, and depth through words alone? It's not possible. And because of this, I have to stop, and you have to listen and discover. For as Jean Sibelius states, quote, "Music begins where the possibilities of language ends." Thank you.
Thank you. Am I on yet? Hello. There we go. Jillian, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. I think I mentioned earlier, she is from a farm in Northern California, and I don't know where you learned to speak like that, but
Wilson Hill Academy.
Wilson Hill, there we go. Well, with that, I would like to present to you, there's stuff here, so don't drop it, the first prize for the Crysostom Prize from the ACCS at Repairing the Ruins. Thank you. Yeah.